Hi, everyone. This is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live September 11th, 2021. It's an interesting day, September 11th. If you're an American, it is indeed an interesting day. You know, Time passes so remarkably fast. It's been 20 years since 2001. 20 years. And I remember September 11th just like it was yesterday. It's one of those days that's burned into my memory. I was 13 years old. I was very young, barely a teenager. And I'd just gotten through living through the 90s, as everyone did. And the 1990s were a time where we viewed America, we viewed the world as kind of post history. The great wars were over. World War II was over, Vietnam was over, and the Soviet Union had been defeated. And even though the world was a very dangerous place and a lot of things were happening, it always felt like it was out there. It wasn't America. It was in the Middle East. It was in Africa. Rwanda happened in Africa, Kosovo, Europe. It's out there. And America was past all of that. And we were living in a new age where everything was going to be a little different. And our problems seemed so local and so small. Our biggest scandal of recent memory was the impeachment of Bill Clinton, a rather trivial thing in the grander scheme of things. And I think of my grandfather and his father. They lived through World War II. And there was a day, December 7th, 1941, a little bit before 8 a.m. It was 7:55 a.m. Pearl Harbor was attacked. And the day after, FDR goes to the Congress and says that December 7th is a day that shall live in infamy and never be forgotten. And it was very impactful for my grandfather, very impactful for his dad, for everyone who grew up in that time. It was burned in their memory, but I could never connect to it. My dad could never connect to it. My mother could never connect to it because they didn't live through it. 20 years later, when I look at September 11th, I lived through that. Although I was quite young, it was the defining moment of my generation, for Americans of my generation. Those who were a little bit older, just a few years older, rushed en masse to join the military. I've met many of them. I know many of them. And they went and served tours in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places specifically because of that event. The entire perspective of America changed. Our safety and security as a nation, our perception of it, that we were far away from everything, oceans on both sides, changed. And we ended up building a lot of things that we probably shouldn't have, from the Department of Homeland Security to unifying all the intelligence agencies and building the world's largest spy state, to all the wars that we've prosecuted. The people who are responsible for that day are all dead or in prisons for the rest of their lives. Very few are left that haven't been caught or found. And to this day, I don't know why we fight anymore. What's the point of the war on terrorism? What does it mean to be an American? We started something because we were angry as a nation, hurt, broken. We've needed some event to be able to carry us through, to restore our pride and our sense of safety and security. And I think to all the dead on that day, what's the best way of honoring them as a nation? I'm 20 years old, a very different person than I was. And all of you listening are probably very different people than you were back in 2001. We now have the luxury of time, just like my grandfather had the luxury of time 20 years after Pearl Harbor, 1961. And we have to ask ourselves, where do we go from here? What do we do from here? Recently, we left Afghanistan, the longest war the United States has ever had. 2 decades there ended up a loss. There's no way to sugarcoat that. There is no way to look at that any other way than what it is. The enemy we sought out to defeat has prevailed. And not only did they win, they've been given $80 billion of our military hardware to defend themselves against us and whomever they desire. We look at the world as a whole, and we can't with a straight face say the world of today in 2021 is a safer world than the world of 2001. Everywhere we look, we see a great degree of unrest, monetary problems, a pandemic that has severely damaged our freedom of movement and opened up interesting questions about whether we'll ever get back to a sense of normalcy or if this is now the new normal, having to show papers everywhere we go. We look at the spy state, aided by artificial intelligence and big data. We now are looking at a reality where the things we say and do are forever recorded, archived, and eventually can and will be used against us if we prove to be politically inconvenient, either by mass media, our competitors, or the governments themselves, as we see with the emergence of social credit and what has happened with social media in society. This is not exactly the world that we envisioned as Americans the day before September 11th. As we entered the new millennia, there was a sense of hope, a belief that we were evolving, growing, changing. The internet was new. So many new companies have been founded. There was so much promise and prospect that the world before us was going to be better than the one that we inherited. Right now, there's a great degree of cynicism. There's huge deficits of trust. There's many people floating around who think that things are going to get much worse. Conspiratorial thinking is no longer the outskirts of society. It's become the norm for most of us. At least every single one of you, in some way, some form, has some thought that has now been labeled conspiratorial or unorthodox in some area. And I am left wondering, is this the legacy of September 11th? Is this the result of that attack? Or was that just an event, like many others, that was inevitable and we had a false sense of security? It's a day of remembrance, and it's a day of tragedy for many. And there are so many families who are impacted in terrible ways. Either they lost loved ones directly, or as a consequence of this, something happened to them, a trauma, a scar that can never quite heal completely. I remember traveling to New York City and seeing the 9/11 memorial. It was an amazing sight the first time I saw it. These two gaping holes with water rushing down, surrounded by names, roses placed in the names whose birthdays there were. And I wonder, will those holes ever be filled? We all feel it. I think on this day, 20 years later, we have to honor those who sacrificed, honor those who died senselessly by reflecting on the arc of society and the direction of humanity. And the best way of creating some meaning where there is none, and to get justice, which has been denied for quite some time, is to embrace the kind of world where 9/11s can't happen. And that's only going to be achieved if we start trusting each other again, if we start loving each other again, if we set aside our egos, our biases, the things that divide us, and we have the humility to admit that we are stronger together than apart. That's my belief. It's always been my belief. It's why I'm in this industry. It's why this industry exists. The point is that we build tools that are designed for all of us to participate and be part of. All of us to find common ground, even if we don't like each other, don't trust each other, don't respect each other. We can at least trust and respect the immutable things, the math, the consensus, the code. And with that new social fabric, perhaps we can find a way to fill those two gaping holes that we have rushing with water. Perhaps we can find a way for the wars to end. Perhaps we can find a way for us not to live in so much fear that we have to fear each other to the extent that we're willing to rob each other of our freedoms and liberties and create a global panopticon. This is not the way. And this is the antithesis of every single thing a free society demands. We cannot allow the violent, evil people who destroyed those towers and damaged the Pentagon to win. And the actions we have taken as a society and globally, in my view, are moving us in that direction. Totalitarianism, fundamentalism, these things are not the way forward. The only way forward is for us to embrace peace and love and compassion and empathy. If we want to have meaning on this day 20 years later, I think the best thing we can all do is take a moment to reflect and think of someone, maybe someone you know well, maybe someone you don't know well, and just close your eyes for a moment and wish that person empathy and well, and hope their day goes well. Hope that they're living the best life. Hope that they have a happy, good year, and that they achieve the great success. If we can all do that collectively, maybe we can all learn that the things that divide us are much smaller than the things that bring us together. And if society can find a way to embrace that mindset, then all the things that we have done globally to each other these past 2 decades, perhaps we can find a way to forgive, set them aside, heal, and get back on track to a brighter tomorrow. This will always be a deeply personal day for all Americans, especially those who lived through it, and especially those who endured conflict as a result of it. But for this day to have meaning, it has to not be an American day. It has to be a human day, one that we remember, we take to heart, and it gives us a sense that we have to change. And if we do, then it can be a day that we can celebrate finally, as the moment that humanity made a choice to be better instead of worse. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it. And I hope in the decades to come, that change does come. Cheers.